Yesterday, my dad showed up at my door with toys for kids I don't have, calling me by a name I didn't recognize and asking about a husband I don't have. It escalated quickly, and I'm still trying to figure out if he's having a breakdown or if something else is going on. Long-time reader, first-time poster. I'm turning to you, the brilliant minds of Reddit, because my dad did something so bizarre yesterday that I can't stop overthinking it. No matter how much I analyze the situation, nothing seems to make sense. I'll try to explain as clearly as possible, but my family's drama could easily fill 10 novels, so I'll keep it concise. First off, let me emphasize again that I do not have children, nor am I married. I have never been married and have never even lived with a man. Here's a rundown of the people who could possibly be involved in whatever this is. My brother, 27M, is in a long-term relationship with a great woman, but neither of them wants kids right now. My sister, 22F, still lives with our mom, has no kids, and isn't in a serious relationship. My parents are divorced. Mom remarried, while dad has remained single. Dad currently lives with my uncle, 40S, and his wife, 40S, My stepdad is fine. He and my mom got married after I moved out, and according to my sister, their relationship is pretty standard, nothing unusual. He has no kids and has never even met my dad, so we can rule out his side of the family. Now, here's what happened. I live in a rundown, third-floor apartment about 45 minutes from my dad's place. Yesterday, around 6 p.m., he unexpectedly showed up at my door. I wasn't expecting him, so I was confused but pleasantly surprised. When I opened the door, he gave me a side hug while holding several boxes of toys, Fisher-Price type stuff meant for toddlers, maybe even babies. At first, I didn't think much of the toys. It didn't even register that they might be for me. He looked completely normal, no signs of distress, no sweating, no dilated pupils. When we hugged, I didn't smell alcohol, smoke, or anything unusual, though I wasn't exactly up close. Curious, I asked why he was here, and he casually said he had been out shopping when he saw the toys and wanted to drop them off for the girls. That's when I froze. Who? He then mentioned two names I had never heard before. My brain immediately started scanning through every relative I could think of, but I came up with nothing. While I was still trying to process that, he glanced over my shoulder and asked if the kids were home or if they were with Mike. Again, who? Apparently, Mike was supposed to be my husband. At this point, I must have been radiating pure confusion because suddenly he started looking confused too, though he was still keeping a light-hearted attitude. I told him I was glad he stopped by, but I was curious about why he was there. He explained he had been out shopping nearby when he came across these toys, which he proudly showed me, and wanted to give them to the girls. I asked who, and he gave me two names I didn't recognize. I remember mentally going through everyone I know in the family, but none of the names matched. While I was still trying to figure out who he was talking about, he glanced into my apartment and asked if the kids were there or if they were with Mike. Again, I was totally confused. Apparently, Mike was supposed to be my husband. I must have looked as confused as I felt because now my dad was also starting to look puzzled, but he was still trying to keep the mood light. I told him that I wasn't married and didn't have any kids. At first, he insisted that I did, but when I repeated myself, he just shook his head. At that point, I started to get really worried. Was my dad lost? Was he having some kind of breakdown? I asked him if he knew where he was, and he quickly got frustrated, saying yes, he knew where he was and who I was. I asked him a few questions like, do you know what time it is? Do you know what year it is? But it only made him angrier. He then started shouting at me, yelling, you think this is funny? And, are you trying to make me look stupid? There was spit gathering at the corners of his mouth, and he went from calm to enraged so fast that it honestly scared me. I started backing away into my apartment, and he took it personally, shouting, oh, now you're scared. You're scared of me. Guess I'll just fuck off then. He stormed out, stomping down the hall like a child. I thought about following him, but he was so furious that it didn't seem wise. The entire interaction lasted less than 5 minutes. I quickly shut and locked my door, then called everyone, my mom, uncle, and siblings. None of them had any idea what had just happened. I even asked my mom and sister if I was the one who had lost my mind and forgotten that I had kids, but they confirmed I definitely didn't. My uncle told me that Dad had left around 4 p.m. to run errands near my place, so that part matched up. I explained everything to him, and he said he'd look into it and update me. It's now the next morning, and I haven't heard back yet. I spent the whole night trying to figure this out. Here are my thoughts. Maybe he has another child somewhere that no one knows about, and that child is married with kids. But if that's the case, why did he show up at my apartment? Could he have confused me with this other hidden child? He did confirm he knew where he was, so I'm not sure. Did he drive here on autopilot? He would have had to get out of his car and walk all the way up to my apartment, which should have been enough time for him to snap out of it. The anger could have come from him realizing what he did and panicking, but it would have been easy enough to just make up a story about it. Maybe he had some kind of mental breakdown. This was my first thought, but he appeared to be perfectly normal. He drove out here, went to a store, and bought things without issue, so he seemed to be in a relatively clear state of mind. Perhaps he was somewhere else mentally. I also thought maybe he was stuck in the past and believed I was someone else, but again, he confirmed where he was and who I was, and none of the names he mentioned matched anyone in our family. He must have done this on purpose, but I have no idea why. Could it be for drama? Our family loves to stir things up, but this seems extreme and makes him look bad, which isn't like him. If he were trying to create drama, he'd want to come out looking good, so this behavior would be a major shift in his usual way of handling things. Maybe he's looking for sympathy. Perhaps he's planning to play it off as a stress breakdown. From what I know, his job doesn't put a lot of pressure on him. He's been in the same role for years and seems happy with it, with the only complaint being occasional overtime. Maybe he's developing dementia. Early onset dementia could explain this, but he's only in his 50s. Sure, he's getting older, but not that old, and up until now, he's never shown any signs of cognitive decline. This is such a huge leap from how he's been that it doesn't seem to fit. If anyone has any idea what might be going on, please let me know. My uncle still hasn't gotten back to me, and my siblings can't get through to my dad's phone. I think it's dead. I left voicemails and texts for my uncle, but I'm not sure if he's seen them. I don't have any authority in my dad's life, my brother does, but he lives in another state, so he can't be of much help. What in the world happened to my dad? Update. Hey everyone. I had planned to wait until I had more details before updating, but so many of you were really concerned about my dad and me, so I wanted to fill you all in on what happened. I finally found my dad. My uncle took him to the hospital the night of the incident, but he had been ignoring our calls and texts, which is why it took so long to get an update. For those who guessed head injury and drugs, you were right. You can claim your winnings. There wasn't a second family, unfortunately. If there were, it would mean drama, not medical trouble. My dad has a severe concussion and significant brain damage. The doctors are amazed he managed to drive to my apartment at all. They believe he was operating on autopilot, as he takes that same freeway nearly every day. The phantom kids he mentioned are actually his coworkers. Somehow, his brain mixed up details of his coworkers' lives with his own. One of his coworkers has a daughter who's married with 2 kids, and those memories got confused with his own. The doctor explained that this kind of memory mix-up is common after head injuries. My uncle did eventually find my dad and took him to the hospital. He went out to my area to look for him and found his car parked outside Walmart around 10 p.m. He couldn't find my dad outside, but he did find him behind the building, bothering an employee for a cigarette. My uncle grabbed him and took him to the hospital. He didn't update anyone because he said he didn't want to worry us, but honestly, I don't believe him. I think my uncle is responsible for what happened and was avoiding us out of guilt. After I posted here, I went to work, and when I clocked out, I went to my dad and uncle's place. Both of their cars were gone, but my aunt's was still there. I knocked, but no one answered. Some people in my previous post mentioned carbon monoxide poisoning, so I was freaking out, thinking my aunt might be dead inside. I went around the house, testing the doors and windows to get in. The back door was unlocked, so I let myself inside and searched the house. It was completely empty, and I even checked under the bed since someone suggested my dad might be hiding out of fear. My aunt's giant purse wasn't there, which made me think she was with my uncle. I then sat in my car and started calling every hospital and jail I could find on Google Maps, but no one had any information and just said they hadn't seen him. I even called the police for a wellness check, hoping they could contact hospitals and get a different answer, but after waiting until about 11 p.m., no one showed up, no cops, no family, no one. So, I drove back home and tried to sleep. The next day, I called out of work and spent the entire day driving around my area trying to find my dad. After failing to track him down, I started calling hospitals again. 2 of the 3 hospitals said, "No, he's not here," but one of them got really nervous when I asked, saying, "I'm not supposed to give out patient information." That made me suspicious. I kept asking, and the person got more flustered with each question. I hung up, drove over there, and saw my uncle's car in the parking lot. It was pretty late dark outside, but there were only about 5 cars in the visitor area, and his was one of them. I was furious. Like, what the hell? He's been here the whole time. I went inside and tried to get the receptionist to let me see my dad. She didn't want to, and I'm not proud of it, but I completely lost it. I slammed my hands on the desk, screamed, and knocked over a magazine rack. My meltdown seemed to get someone's attention, because eventually, my aunt came out and told the receptionist it was fine for me to go through. She didn't look well, tired and sad, but it was enough to make me calm down, if you can call it that. Long story short, she took me to my dad's room. He looked awful. For those of you who don't know him, my dad's a big guy, 5 feet 11 inches with huge smile lines and bright eyes. He's always full of life, but laying in that hospital bed, he looked completely lifeless. His eyes were sunken, and his face was droopy and empty. I was able to talk to him a bit, but he was out of it. He had to be reminded who I was a few times and kept forgetting where he was and why he was there. Just like my dad, when I get upset, I get angry. I practically dragged my uncle out into the hallway to get some answers. After about 20 minutes of him dodging questions and making excuses, which makes me think he's guilty, he finally told me what happened. Apparently, on Monday morning, my dad fell while getting out of his car and hit his head really hard on the driveway. He got up, and everyone thought he was fine, so they just went inside like nothing happened. Later, he mentioned having a headache, so they gave him a few prescription painkillers to ease the pain. That seemed to help, so they let him continue his day as usual. They only started getting concerned when I called my uncle and told him what happened. The way he acted, being so evasive and weird, made me feel like there's more to the story, but I couldn't lose it on him in the hospital hallway, so I just let it go for now. Here's what I think happened. I know my uncle and dad, and I know the history of this stupid family like the back of my hands. I think my dad and uncle got in a fight over something, and dad was either pushed down or hit in the head by my uncle. The altercation gets resolved somehow and they go back to normal, but my dad's head still hurts. I learned at the hospital from the doctor that there were enough painkillers in his body to numb a horse, so I suspect my aunt and uncle just kept feeding him painkillers so they wouldn't need to take my dad to the hospital and admit what they did. I pressed my aunt about the painkillers and she eventually halfway admitted that they weren't exactly allowed to have them at all. I suspect she bought them off someone else. They're likely addicted and I just didn't know. I'm nearly certain this is their fault. If they'd taken my dad to the hospital right after he hit his head, he'd probably be fine. I'm at the hospital now, and my aunt and uncle have left. The doctor told me not to get my hopes up about my dad, but whenever they say that, it usually means he'll be okay, right? That's how it always goes. They tell you your loved one might not make it, and then they surprise you and pull through. I'm sorry, but the rest of this is just me venting. What really gets to me is the lack of care from literally everyone except me. I could deal with all this if I had support. My uncle and aunt have never been reliable, so I can believe they're at fault here. But the hardest part is realizing I'm the only one who seems to give a damn. I had to practically blackmail my brother, due to some drama from a year ago, to get him to agree to come out here. My mom doesn't care. My dad's side of the family doesn't care. My sister sort of cares but doesn't want to help or even come to the hospital. I'm just stunned that I'm the only one here for my dad, and he doesn't even recognize me. I've had to take time off work, but my job doesn't offer PTO, so I'm screwed. My dad's screwed. My life's screwed. Why is no one else dealing with this? My brother is the only one who has the time and money to help, but I had to threaten him to get him to come back. I regret not chasing after my dad when he left my apartment. I was scared of him, but now I'm more terrified. My dad is probably going to die, and I trusted the idiot who's responsible for this to help him. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with everyone? Why doesn't anyone care about my dad? Why doesn't anyone care about me? I could have been a better daughter. I could have called more, visited more, involved him in more things. I could have chased him when he left my apartment. I might have gotten hurt, but I'd rather have been beaten than be sitting here in a hospital room with my unconscious and possibly dying father. I'm so fucking stupid. I'm sorry, Dad. Comment exchange. Commenter, I know you're going through a tough time, but please stop directing anger at the hospital staff. They're just doing their jobs. OOP, I only raised my voice at the receptionist, and I apologize later once I calm down. I'm not upset with the doctors or nurses, I'm frustrated with my uncle and aunt, and pretty much everyone else. The hospital staff is the only group that seems to care about my dad, and I'm really thankful for them. I'm doing my best to stay kind and understanding and apologize if my tone ever gets too harsh. Talk to the police or a hospital social worker. A social worker did speak with me after my uncle left, but it didn't feel like they were really listening. I'll try again to have someone speak with me since I'm sure my dad wasn't just taking painkillers like they were candy on his own. Calling the police on your uncle is totally justified, especially because of the painkillers. He could be responsible for homicide. I'm pretty sure this is exactly why they waited so long and kept giving him painkillers. They were hoping it would just go away. Even when they brought him here, they kept everything secret, hoping the doctors would magically fix him, and everyone could pretend like nothing happened. Did the doctor give any medical details about his condition? Kind of. I asked him to explain it in simpler terms because I don't have any medical background at all. I'm a line cook at Denny's, for crying out loud. He mentioned a massive concussion, brain damage, nerve damage, and cell death. He said it's pretty bad and told me not to get my hopes up for recovery. He looked almost sick while telling me that, so I'm guessing my dad probably won't make it. Try to be kind to yourself, this isn't your fault. Thank you. I'm really trying to remind myself that I did everything I could, but it always feels like there's more I could have done. That's how it always feels in situations like this. No matter how much you try, it feels like it's never enough. I spoke with the social worker, but they didn't seem to listen, so I'll push harder the next time they come around. Did the doctor say your dad's injury is consistent with a fall? I asked the doctor if my uncle's story matched up with my dad's injury, but the doctor just said it was an impact wound, whatever that means. He couldn't confirm or deny anything, and I totally get it. He's not a cop and can't really provide any answers on that. Update comment 4 hours later. A couple of cops came by to speak with me and get a statement. They seemed to take me seriously and took down my contact information. I told them everything that happened when my dad came to my apartment, what my uncle said, and how I didn't believe his story. I also shared my version of things and tried to provide as much context as possible. I think they believed me, but who knows? They mentioned they'd be back soon. I'm not sure what the next steps are, but I'll be pushing for more information when they return. OOP responds to a comment asking about family dynamics and whether her siblings have an issue with their dad. It's not essential to the main post, but it gives helpful context, so I'm including it here. I'll do my best to explain, but it's a long and complicated story. Nobody in my family is without fault, not even my siblings or myself. My parents were married until the recession hit in 2008, and I believe they divorced around 2010, though I can't recall the exact year. Before the economy crashed, their marriage was fine, but once things got financially tough, the fight started. They argued about money, who spent it, why it was spent, and if it was worth it. I remember one huge argument when my dad was smoking more than he was allowed because they couldn't afford enough for both of them. Money problems never really got solved, they just fizzle out until the next issue came up. There was no violence from my dad, but my brother claims he saw our mom slap him across the face during an argument. I don't believe she did it out of nowhere. My dad must have said something that triggered her, but I wasn't there to see it. During this time, my dad was pretty selfish. He'd buy things for himself when we really needed that money more. It was always little things, but they added up: an energy drink, extra cigarettes, a new pocket knife, or hat, whatever he needed to get through the day. When they divorced, there wasn't much to split, just us kids. Mom got us, and my dad just drifted for most of my teenage years. He became one of those phones work both ways dads, but he did show up for holidays and events, so he wasn't completely absent. It hit my brother the hardest. I remember him crying at night, asking why our dad didn't love him anymore. He's my dad's only son and used to get a lot of special father-son time when my dad still lived at home. Mom didn't make it easy for my dad to see us. She insisted that if he wanted to see us, he had to take us somewhere, but when you're broke, taking 3 kids out for dinner or a movie is tough. I know he tried, but he could have tried harder. Mom would often take the opportunity to bash him for being broke, but we were all broke, so it had this bitter undertone that still got to us, even though we knew it was spiteful. My sister barely remembers our dad living with us, so her connection to him is pretty weak. My brother remembers more, but he's still hurt by how our dad drifted away without rebuilding the special bond they once had. After that, Dad bounced around on couches until he got a job and rented a townhouse in a decent neighborhood. I think I was around 17 when that happened. By then, my brother had already left home, and I was on my way out too, but I visited a few times, and it seemed like Dad was starting to get his life back on track. He called more, invited us over, and made an effort. Eventually, something happened with the townhouse. Probably the rent got too high, since the area shifted from nice to rich white people nice. He ended up moving in with my aunt and uncle. After that, his efforts pretty much stopped. Based on what I know about him, I think he was ashamed of being poor again and didn't want us to see him like that. I stayed in touch, but my brother gave up after he moved away, and my sister never really had much contact with him anyway. No one really came out on top or lost in that situation. My mom did okay for herself. She even ended up owning her own house, which was something none of us thought would happen, given how we've always lived below the poverty line. Owning a home is a big deal for us. There's more drama, but that's the gist of it.